Coffees, it's David here. I'm just doing the London recap for today. So the daily, we've had this big sell-off over the last few days, and I know some people have been getting frustrated that price hasn't pulled back, whatever. But whenever price is dropping like this, it's easy to think that it's going to keep dropping like this forever. But in true mass psychology, usually whenever everyone thinks it's going to keep dropping forever is exactly whenever it turns around, and then we have come into this sort of extreme daily demand here. You can see it's sort of swept liquidity there. Now I think ultimately these lows are going to get smashed, but after that sell off I think it's very likely that we're going to get a decent pullback, sort of maybe up towards the EQ of the leg. That's a very clean zone there. It's in the premium swept liquidity. So over the coming days we could maybe get sort of a bullish pullback sort of into the premium, and then we can look for shorts from sort of up around here if they set up. But 4 hour then this morning we're sort of sitting around here, so we know bullish chalk ran in the signal that sort of a deeper pullback in the 4 hour was imminent. But seeing as we had come into daily demand, I was aware that it was sort of possible that we could get a decent reaction from here, sort of a deeper pullback up into the premium, maybe up to that zone there. That's nested in the daily zone that I mentioned earlier. It's in the daily premium swept liquidity, very tidy zone. I have these demand or these supply zones drawn on. It's like I'm not really expecting the continuation of the bearish trend from them. I think now that we've had the chalk coming off the daily demand, I think it's very likely they'll sort of pull back towards the premium. This might just be a reaction point to maybe come down and fill up this demand to cause the chalk. So yeah, that's the 4 hour. And the M15, the key detail in the M15 is the sweep of this low. It's like whenever you have the M15 swing low and you're bearish and you get, like you can see, tries to push below and then a very sharp retrace back up, like that's usually a sign that a lot of bullish pressure has stepped into the market and that something might be changing. So coming into London this morning, I was aware that yes, the M15 was still bearish, but we had this sweep of liquidity coming off the daily demand. So it was possible that the M15 could switch bullish to sort of facilitate a 4 hour daily pullback. So I think at 7 o'clock this morning we're sort of sitting around here. I was looking for sells from this POI here, again not the best because this high was technically weak as it failed to cause a new swing low. So I was always aware that it was possible sort of this high and that high could be used as inducement for the extreme. But again, it was high enough value, it was a high enough probability zone for me to look for sells from it. Now there was a couple of potential entries, but I personally didn't take them. They just weren't high probability enough for me. Demand was in control, so sort of you could see this sort of this zone here flipped something sort of in that sort of range, and then sort of an IBOS as well, so it was valid to sort of just follow the bullish order flow in the M15 in the expectation that the trend may change following the sweep of liquidity and the mitigation of daily demand. So you could have taken a buy in there, but there was no tag. And then these wicks, again, not a massive fan of the POI. It's in the premium. It's only wicks, so it didn't sweep liquidity. It's very small. It's like, but whenever you have whatever the POI was that caused the boss, there's usually a lot of orders sitting in it, and they're always worth having drawn on. And if you do get a clean entry model, they're worth the risk. So you can see that is the one that basically caused this candle to close above there. So when price pulled back into it, there was a potential buy within there. But again, the entry model just wasn't clean enough for me, given that I wasn't a massive fan of the M15 POI either. So I'll just go through the entries here in the M1. Yeah, these were the potential sells. Mitigated the M15 supply, M1 supply within it. The main thing that put me off this was how corrective this push down was. It's like you can see basically it was 2 candles up, a lot of momentum in, and then I think it took 11 candles to sort of cause the chalk. So that to me is a major red flag that maybe there isn't that many orders within this POI. Now in this case, yeah, it pulled back up and it mitigated this here, and it held and it caused another push down. But I was sort of happy enough to sit in my hands, because whenever we had the other push down, you could have basically played a double confirmation entry. But at this point, it was sort of equal highs behind. I wasn't a massive fan of how corrective this was. The sort of thing, it was very likely this was just building liquidity to get smashed, which is ultimately what happened here. So at this point, whenever this entry set up, I was thinking that we might basically get a more typical entry model, sort of where you get the sweep of the equal highs and then pull back in, just sort of your standard entry model. I would have been all over that if it had the liquidation and all. So that's just why I personally wasn't interested in them. M15 demand was in control, so you could have looked for a buy from here. You know, you have a bit of a liquidation there, V shape. So you could have looked under there, but there was no tag on it. Again, the key detail is there the M15 demand was in control, internal structure was bullish, and we had the sweep of liquidity at the low, so it was always possible that the M15 trend was going to switch bullish, so there was value in looking for buys there. This is the sort of little POI that caused the M15 boss. As like you can see how small it looks even on the M1. So it's not a POI it was massively keen on, but all is worth keeping an eye on. As I say, the ones that actually caused the boss are high probability. You can see we pulled back into this sort of supply range reaction failed. This didn't sweep, and while technically the extreme was mitigated, the cross be something unmitigated within it in seconds. So personally, if you take it back to here, it's like I just wasn't a massive fan of how sort of corrective it was at this point. It was sort of reminiscent of this price action over here, and I just wasn't a massive fan of it, and I didn't really want to enter on the flip that didn't sweep either, so but it played out nicely. Yeah, that was just me being fussy with the order model. With the entry model again, it's more than valid. Made sense sort of after the M15 boss, this caused the boss. Yeah, so it did make sense. Just not something I really wanted to risk my capital on. Then sort of now we've pulled back into this M15 supply, or M15 demand, sorry. So you might see a continuation of the M15 bullish trend from here coming into New York, and then I will just do AU as well. AU is bullish overall. This was the most recent boss, close above, but then we had the bearish chalk and sort of supply was in control the whole way down. We've come into sort of refined wick demand. We had this sort of inducement in front of it, so it's not surprising we're getting a good reaction from it. Now, it remains to be seen whether this will be a continuation of the daily bullish trend, or will it just be a pullback to sort of maybe mitigate this supply before we sort of maybe push down and maybe mitigate this here before we see the continuation of the bullish trend. So that's the daily. 4 hour this morning we had the bullish chalk, so it was possible following this that we will see maybe a more complex 4 hour pullback, at least into here, or maybe it could be this first sign that the 4 hour order flow is switching bullish, that we'll sort of see the daily take over and we'll get the next daily leg to the upside. But we didn't really pull it back into any of the newly created demand on the 4 hour, but the bullish chalk was probably the first sign that maybe we are going to get something deeper. The EQ of this supply has already been mitigated, and it'll be mitigated twice already, so I don't think there will be enough orders left in this here to cause the next leg to downside. We could sort of mitigate something at the EQ of this extreme, so always be mindful of that there. Even though we have had the 4 hour bullish chalk, we are still bearish overall, so it is possible we could mitigate something in there and then continue lower. So even if the M15 is bullish and the 4 hour internal is bullish, if there's like a nice M15 POI at the extreme of this 4 hour range inside that 4 hour POI, then I'd be happy to look for sells on the M1. M15 this morning we had sort of this that was a liquidity sweep at the time. We failed to close above the high, so sweep of ERL, sweep of the M15 high, so that could have easily been the M15 staying bearish, and then we get the next leg to the downside. We just missed these wicks, which sort of, had we mitigated that there, I would have been more inclined to sort of look for sells in the M1 come down here, but yeah, it's like I just wasn't really a massive fan of it. I don't pull, but these sort of wicks caused this failed reaction. So basically, see this, we reacted to the supply, got the reaction, and then basically the reaction failed. So this is technically the zone that caused that, and then it also caused the wick of the high as well. So while it would have been better if we had got it close above, it was still possible that we continued, that there would be a lot of orders within this. On the M1 then there was a potential entry, but there was no tag. You can see we sort of very clean entry model. You can see a lot of momentum in and then a lot of momentum out, mitigated the refined M1 and the M15 POI. Sort of pulled back into the supply range, got the reaction with those two sort of high test candles, reaction failed, and then we smashed through it, so you could have easily entered on the EQ of the flip there. And yeah, there was no tag. I was talking to somebody in my DMs yesterday about sort of how AU doesn't like to mitigate the sort of fine pivots as much, but what it does do a lot is it mitigates the range. So in this case you have the sell to buy range on the M1. So you can see we sort of closed above it and then we came back in and retested it. So something that I'm looking at is sort of, instead of us waiting for the refined pivot to be hit, you can sort of say, right, the range has been hit, so just view this whole thing as mitigated. And then once you sort of get the bullish chalk here, then you can just try and follow the order flow from there. But yeah, again, no tag on it, but the trade made sense. So that is it, guys. That is EU and AU for today. If you have any questions, as always, drop me a message or tag me in one of the public channels and I will get back to you. Thanks very much, guys.